Good evening or good afternoon, whatever time you're watching this video today. I have been wanting to do this. Just figured, well, now's the time as any as far as discussing this. To begin this video, I wanted to give a brief description about my family history. People pretty much feel that only blacks were slaves at the time of the Civil War. Well, that's not true. There were other kinds of people who actually were in a slave situation, or they were under servitude to somebody else. These people were called indentured servants. Now, I don't know if y'all even have heard of that phrase before, but I'm going to explain it to you. My great-great-grandfather came from Ireland, and we don't know exactly all the details because we don't have a family Bible, but as we understand it, he was arrested, or actually he was caught stealing something. And in Ireland, I suppose that they either had a shortage of jails, or that you had an option to pay back what you had stolen from this individual by serving them. And he was in a really lucky situation. The people who he served this indentured service to came to America, and he was allowed to come to the United States, and once he served out this servitude time period, he was permitted to go free. And after he completed this time, I'm assuming that he was very ill from either malaria, or he might have had some other kind of a disease that he brought from the British Isles, and he was left to die. And he was taken in by an Indian tribe somewhere, I believe, in either North Carolina or South Carolina, and it was called the Quabbins. And he married a squaw, and people who know about Indians know that most women were squaws because they always served whoever they were picked in the tribe to live with or be, espoused to. And even the Japanese do that even today. They are actually, their marriages are preordained even when they're first like 2 or 3 years old. But the squaw was basically whoever the Indian in that tribe wanted, he took her. Well, in this case, my great-great-grandfather was an Irishman, and they felt pity for him, and they took him in. And anyway, that's pretty much what happened as far as my family history on my mother's side. Because she met my grandmother, she met her, and she was considered to be a medicine woman because she had the ability. When she was in the woods, she lived out pretty much in the middle of nowhere, and the closest relative was her brother, and he lived about maybe 2 or 3 miles away. And to communicate with each other, they did not have a telephone. They had the ability, the Indians had this ability to make bird sounds, and then they could actually identify themselves saying things over great distances that way. And that's as much of it as I know about my grandmother. Now, everybody's probably going to wonder, what does this have to do with Martin Luther King? Well, first of all, the fact that I'm trying to prove in this video today that there weren't just blacks who were slaves, there were whites, and that there were different types of slavery that people endured during the time of the Civil War and even before then. And I can say on behalf of my family and my ancestors that my great-great-grandfather was a slave, because he had to serve out a certain period of time before he was allowed to be freed. And I don't know if his ancestors before him were in the same boat or not. I don't know, but we only know that he was freed after he served that time, and we don't know how long it was. But when I say in the video that meeting Martin Luther King was no big deal, I'm referring to the fact that my father actually met him in 1965 or 1967. This is before he went to Tennessee, to Memphis. I'm not saying this is the actual flight that he took, but my father worked for United Airlines. And he started in 1956 with Capital Airlines, and Capital Airlines was acquired by United. And he worked at the United ticket counter at the Atlanta Municipal Airport, which is actually now the grounds of Hartsfield International. And when he relates this story to me, I'm just going to say it exactly the way he told me. He said Martin Luther King was no different a man than anybody else. People have made him into being a god, a deity, because of the fact that he did so much for people. But as far as what my father got from this one encounter he had with Martin Luther King Jr., he said to me he was no different than anybody else. And this is how he related the story. He was at the ticket counter. Two black, very husky men come up to him and say, we're here to buy a ticket. First thing my father asked him, is this going to be yourself or is this other gentleman accompanying you? And this black guy says, no, we're not flying at all. So my father said, well, who's ever buying this ticket has to come up and sign for this receipt. You have to have the person who's buying this ticket. So this husky black guy says to my father, he says, well, this is for Martin Luther King. And my father said, I don't care who it is, he has to come up here and sign this ticket. Well, now the black guy gets really upset with my father. I mean, he gets really agitated. And he says, do you know who it is you're talking about? And, I mean, my father wasn't fazed. He was like, should I be? I mean, this is the rule. Every passenger who flies has to sign this ticket. You have to sign it to prove that you paid for it and that it's you that's actually going on this flight. So they went back and forth about this. And finally, both of these individuals, who I assume were Martin Luther King's bodyguards, they left. And before you know it, here comes Martin Luther King strutting up to the counter and says, good morning. You know, and my father's recollection of Martin Luther King was, he was like just an average guy. He paid for the ticket, he signed it, and that was pretty much his encounter. But the fact is that people adorize him so much to think that what he did for civil rights in this country justifies him being kind of elevated to a level where he's considered more than just a human being or a man. And I can say honestly that my father's encounter with him was simply that he was no different. He's like you and me. He was the same person. Now, before I end the video, I wanted to share one other experience my father had, and he told me about this. When he served in the Korean War, and this was from 1953 until 1957, 56, right before he started with United Airlines, he was in the Army. And right after he completed his basic training, or boot camp, he was sent to one of the bases, I think somewhere here in Georgia, I believe. And this is what's really the ironic thing. In the 50s, during the Korean War, they segregated blacks and whites. That means there were black bases, there were white bases. They sent whites to white bases, they sent blacks to their own bases. Well, they made a mistake and they sent my father to one of these black bases. And this is the experience that he told me before he died. He said, I got my orders, I flew out to this base, wherever it was. He got on a bus because they transported all of the military people by private bus to the base. And the bus driver said, are you sure you want to go to this base? And my father said, yeah, this is on my orders, I gotta go. So the driver said, okay. So he took him out there, and when he got to the base, He started to get off the bus, and there was a black officer who ran up to the bus because nobody else was on it but my father, and he saw that my father was white. And the first thing this officer said was, "What are you doing here?" So my father took his orders out, he showed it to this black officer, he said, "This is where they told me to report to, I'm here." So this black officer says, "You stay on this bus and don't get off." And so he left the bus, went to wherever I guess the officers check in, and out comes his superior officer. I guess this must be like the highest ranking official for that particular base. And he says to my father, he says, "Your orders are wrong. You're not supposed to be here." And my father kept wondering, what are y'all guys talking about? Why are y'all making such a big deal about this? They never told him it was a black base. They just said, he told this other officer, he says, "You keep him on the bus, you don't let anybody else see him." And that's verbatim. He said that. He said, "You do not let this person off this bus. You do not let anyone else see him, and I will get this taken care of. I'll get it straightened out." So he was left on the bus, I don't know for how long. And sure enough, he said, before I knew it, they had the orders changed. The bus took me right back out of the base. I never saw anybody else, and nobody saw me. And I guess years later, or maybe a few months later, he was asking other people about it, and they told him that was a very specifically designated black base. In other words, no one else was sent there but black officers. No whites were ever allowed on the base. There were no whites who were integrated at that base. I don't know which one, but that is the experience my father had. And I would put as a footnote of why he was treated that way, that they were so concerned there could be a riot, there could have been some sort of an encounter, or like a fight might have broke out because of the fact that they saw a white man on their base or something else. But my father always felt that there was nothing big about him being there as much as it was that the other officers were concerned for his welfare and his safety, that they did not want him getting off, and they did not want anybody else to see him. And that is why he was told to stay on the bus, don't get off, don't wander around looking at anything. And I'm again speculating that the reason why he was treated that way was because there was a lot of temperament and tension that the blacks felt even in the 50s about white officers, because of the fact that they were segregated on their own bases, and that if they had seen a white officer there, it could have caused some kind of a repercussion. There could have been a massive response, riot, retaliation, revolt. That's the best word I can think of, a revolt of some kind, of why they did not want him seen on the base. But that was, to me, it always stood out in my mind of his experience of how he described it. He said, "I didn't feel worried. It was just the fact that I was there and that they were so upset about me being there, as though I had done it myself intentionally. And it was a mistake. Somebody had made the orders wrong. They had filled them out wrong. They gave it to somebody. It's very likely they saw his last name as Carter, and a lot of blacks are last name Carter, and they just automatically assumed he was black without even knowing who he was, and they just sent him there without even checking to make sure, who are we sending to this base? And they didn't do that. So to end this video, I'll say this much. If people have a racial attitude that blacks have been subjugated, and therefore this retaliation that they think the cops are making against them, there's a lot of other people who have been in that same boat, folks, not just blacks, but whites too. And that's the reason for this video today. Think about everybody and not just you. Thank you.